Hi, I'm Andy Young and I'm one of the lecturers down at Unitech in Auckland. I teach automotive and I'm also a warrant inspector for cars and motorcycles as well here in New Zealand. And one of the tasks, this particular bike came in the other week, and I've already completed some of the work on there. We've done new fork seals, stripped down the whole front forks, put new seals in, rebuilt them with new oil. Rear tyres being fitted on, and the last job to do is to fit a new final drive chain and sprocket kit. Now, chains and sprockets, the final drives, are extremely important for safety reasons, especially. If the chain was to come off, it can cause the bike the rear wheel to lock up. It can also cause damage to the gearbox as well. So, you know, it could get quite expensive if you tear some teeth off in the gearbox, or it could throw you off the bike, and then it could be, the end, which is not good. So, today I'm going to show you how to fit the rear sprocket, a new front sprocket, I can't really see that now, and a decent quality chain. DID, excellent chains. This is an O-ring chain. If you've got a sports bike, then go for the X-ring version. They use or absorb a lot less power to drive that chain. There's a lot of resistance when you're actually moving those links around the sprockets. If you go for the X-ring, much less resistance, about half, which means you get more power at the back wheel, which means go faster, which is what riding bikes is all about, isn't it? Okay, so moving on, here's the bike. Now, the easiest way to tell if your rear chain and sprockets is worn out, and they should always be replaced as a set. People, dealers, have been known to take off a worn chain, partly worn sprockets, and just put a new chain on. A number of factors with that. A, it's noisy because the chain has a different distance between the links because it's worn, and the sprockets are worn and they don't match anymore. Secondly to that, the chain will not last very long at all. It's running on sprockets with a different pitch because the teeth have worn away. The chain tends to ride up the teeth, and the chain won't last very long at all. So really, I can see why dealers do it. It's a cheaper option for them, but it's not really in the interests of the next owner of the bike. It should have a full kit fitted. Owners are just as bad. They'll go for the budget option and just throw a chain on, use two chains for every set of sprockets. The second chain will probably last about half the mileage of the first chain. So, hey, it's your call, it's your money, but I would recommend that you fit a new chain and a pair of sprockets. And the sprockets are not that expensive. I think this whole kit, chain and sprockets, retail about $250, and you're looking at about an hour's labour to pop it on the bike. I'm only going to charge the guy half an hour because I've already fitted the rear tyre, so the back wheel had to come out anyway to put the tyre on. So be fair to your customers, that's what it's all about. They'll come back. I've known this guy now for 3 years. This is one of my favourite bikes. One day, maybe Graham, I'll buy it from you, who knows. Add it to my collection, we'll see. But yeah, Yamaha's great bikes, proven engine. These things go forever, as long as you look after them, just like most things. Okay, so first job is to jack up the rear wheel, get the back wheel taken out, and then we can crack off the rear sprocket. Before we do any of that, before we even jack it up, we need to crack off the large retaining nut on the gearbox output shaft. And the reason for that is once the chain's off, we're going to find it difficult to hold that shaft in place to crack the nut off. Sure, some mechanics will put the engine into gear and use a rattle gun on there. But can you imagine what that's doing to the teeth inside the gearbox? I don't want to be responsible for damaging teeth or tearing teeth off gears and gearboxes. That's really bad practice. We've got a chain that's linking it to the rear wheel. Let's lock the back wheel down into place, and the chain will hold the front sprocket in place. And then we can just reverse the procedure later on when we're tightening that nut back up again. Whatever you do, don't put the bike into gear and use a big rattle gun or a windy gun to buzz off that large nut. Because, hey, you might get away with it 9 times out of 10, but you've only got to break one tooth off once, and you're going to have a full engine rebuild. So, bad practice, don't do it. Okay, so first job on this particular bike, we've got to remove the gear lever. That's a 10mm spanner size pinch bolt. Remove that, then we get the gear lever out of the way, and then we've got the cover to take off for the front sprocket housing. Once that cover's off, we can then get access to that large retaining nut, and we can get that removed. So here we go. There we go. Okay, you'll notice that on the end of the gearbox selector shaft, there's a small centre punch mark essentially on the end of that shaft. It's not really a centre punch mark because it's a hardened shaft, it can't be done. But that centre punch mark must line up with the groove, the gap here, and that will set your lever height correctly. Now, obviously some riders do play around with that. And before I took this lever off, I noticed that the centre punch mark is actually, in fact, in line with that slot. So that's exactly how it's going to go back on the bike, because riders don't like you playing around with their bikes. Okay, so next job, we've got a couple of bolts that retain that cover in place. It's a 5mm Allen key. I'm using a socket because it's easier. Pop that into there, crack those off. There we go, nice and easy. I always find it best, wherever possible, to leave the bolts with each cover in place, because they do vary in length a lot on motorcycles. Okay, so we've got here, this is the large retaining nut for the front sprocket, and it should have, you see there's a little tab washer there, look. That tab washer hasn't been bent down, but there should be one that is, and in actual fact, well, this one hasn't either really, so whoever fitted that front sprocket didn't do a very good job. And but I'm going to tap those flat so we can get a socket onto the onto that nut, and we're going to use a power bar once we've locked the rear wheel. So it's very important that you flatten these tabs down so you can get your socket all the way on. The last thing we want to do is round off that nut. That will be essentially a very bad thing. They can be extremely tight. The bike's currently in neutral, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a ratchet strap onto the bike hoist to lock the rear wheel down, and I'm also going to activate the rear brake to give it some additional assistance as well. Once that's done, I can then get the power bar on there and crack that nut off. When I reinstall these nuts, I always use a bit of thread lock at the same time. We don't want that nut coming loose. Otherwise the sprocket's going to chatter on the output shaft, and it's going to cause some pretty serious wear to the splines on that shaft. Okay, so I've strapped the rear wheel down to the hoist, and I've activated the rear brake just by pulling that down with another strap. Now, most of you won't have a hoist. What you will have, hopefully, is a mate, and your mate can press the brake pedal down just as you crack this off. This can be done with the bike on the ground, it's not an issue. Okay, so we've got on this particular bike a 30mm standard depth, single hex, hardened steel impact socket. I want to give this thing the best possible chance of getting undone without slipping off. These are great sockets, the impact sockets, and of course I'm going to use a, there you go, look, power bar, cracking bar, English. Okay, there he goes. There we go. Easy. So that's the front sprocket nut, retaining nuts removed. That's the retaining collar. You'll need a new one of those whenever you do this job. I'm not going to replace it this time around because the last person that fitted that didn't bother to use it. So I don't need to get a new one of those on this particular job. With the nut, most bikes you'll see on one side of the nut is completely flat. The other side of the nut there's a recess, and it's recessed towards the gearbox. And that recess, that void, is there to clear any additional splines that protrude beyond the sprocket. Sprockets sometimes vary in width. And the last thing you want to do is put that nut on the wrong way around, because if you did, then it wouldn't actually hold the sprocket. The sprocket would be floating on those splines. So recess always to the inside, unless the manual says otherwise, I suppose. Okay, now next job, we can remove the strap now, we can take the rear brake off, and we can cut the chain. Now there are different kinds of chains out there. Sorry, I'm a bit close to the camera. There are different kinds of chains out there, or different ways also of joining that chain. We can use a normal split link, which can be removed and put back on again. Just with use of a screwdriver normally. Those really, strictly speaking, are a use only once item. The little spring clip should be only used once. And the other way to join the chains is a rivet link, is to rivet those links together. Now, this chain's going to go in the bin. I could slit disc it, I could just cut the chain clean in half. Sure, there's a slight risk involved with that in a workshop. We've got lots of sparks flying around. Potentially we could damage the paintwork on the bike if the customer's really picky. And of course it could be a source of ignition. You know, there could be fuel lying around. Carburetted bikes, if the float's just a bit full, we've been shaking the bike around, there could be a little bit of fuel in the overflow pipe going out the bottom of the carb. Those sparks, it could potentially cause a fire. So on this particular bike, I'm going to remove the split link. It's safer. It's sort of the right way of doing it anyway. But you will find in most bike shops, and I do this as well, is we just grab a rechargeable angle grinder and just cut straight through the chain, chuck it in the bin, job done. Really quick, easy, you're not fiddling around. And it's all about time. Time is money. Okay. Okay, so for jacking up the bike, I just use an old mechanical jack that came out of an old Nissan Patrol, my Nissan Patrol, one of them. Mechanical ones are great. This one just has a worm drive inside because they don't creep down. If you use a hydraulic one, over time they can creep. This isn't going to go anywhere. It's very, very reliable. Go away, fly. Doesn't cause any problems at all. Just pop that under there. Get the jacking handle. There we go. Now you don't want the wheel to be any great distance off the ground because it makes it easier if the wheel's about the right height when you're putting it back in again later on. Okay, let's see if we can find this split link. There we go. Okay, so there's the little split link. And you can see on the split link that there is an open end. You see that? Okay, there you are. An open end and a closed end. Now, the closed end should always be on the end of the link, which is in the direction of travel towards the gearbox. When the wheel's rotating forwards, the link's going towards the gearbox that way. And as it travels down towards the gearbox, it goes around the front sprocket. And then, on this particular bike, it passes a chain guard. Now you can see that the chain guard stops the chain from whipping out too far outwards, because if it did, it could come off the rear sprocket. That means at some point in time, there is a possibility that the chain, it's inevitable really, that it's going to catch on the inside of this plastic. If you fitted this clip the wrong way around, get to focus, there we go, look. Fit it the wrong way around, then all it will do is it'll hit this end instead, the open end first, and it'll push the clip back across the split link pins. Now when it does that, the split link will fly off. This little clip will just fly off. Then the outer plate, which is this one here, the thick plates just behind the clip, will then work loose and fall off. And at that point, the inner plate, this one here, will start to bend because of the torque, the drive being transmitted through the chain. And then it will fail. When it fails, there's two things that could possibly happen. One, the chain flicks round the front sprocket There, look, around the front sprocket, and then fires off out the back of the bike down the road, and you come to a stop. Damn, that's a shame. Or, if you're unlucky, the chain will actually coil around the front sprocket, and it'll build up layer upon layer. Now, there's not a lot of room in there. In fact, there's only a finger's gap between the chain itself and the stator cover on this particular bike. And so there's no room for that chain, and what will happen is it'll start to damage the stator cover. It'll lock the gearbox, so you could tear teeth inside the gearbox, and it could even crack the casing of the gearbox because there's no gap. So it's trying to force, essentially, the flywheel and the output shaft further apart. It's like a wedge, and it pulls it apart. I know this for a fact. It's happened to me on a Yamaha Super Tenere 750, so basically the big brother of this particular bike. Did it on me. Chain snapped for whatever reason, and it did in fact crack the gearbox casing, and I was not a happy bunny. I had a full engine rebuild to do with a new casing, and it was extremely expensive. So for you guys, if you're going to use split link chains, please make sure you fit the link in the correct orientation, and I'll be showing you how to fit them a bit later on. Now, because this chain's got a split link, I'm going to use that to split the chain to take it off. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how to remove these little split links. Very simple. Flat screwdriver. I've just stopped the rear wheel from turning. I've just lowered it back down again so it can't turn. And all you do basically is pop your flat screwdriver onto there and give it a tap with the palm of your hand, and you'll see it's now moved forwards. There's a couple of grooves in the end of these little pins here, and then we can tap it a bit further forward again, and you'll see now that we can take the little split pin link clip C-clip thing off, out of the way. That's now scrap. We should now be able to push those through. There we go. We can get the outer plate off. So that's the outer plate there, look. Outer drive plate. And then, without getting in the way of the camera too much, these are the little O-rings, by the way. Get rid of those. Wow, this chain is knackered. Okay. And you can see all the brown rust, ready brown rust on there. That tells me that the chain had run out of lubrication a long time ago. You can actually see a reduction in the diameter of the pins. This chain is so worn. So definitely a good call to replace it. Okay, so I'm just going to jack the bike back up again. I've moved it across on the hoist a little bit to aid the filming process. Normally you have the bike central. So bike, there we are, look, wheels back up in the air. And now we can get the old chain off. Very, very easy. There we go. And that, oh wow. You can see that or not, but you can actually see the wear in those links. If I lift it up and down, I don't know if you can see that or not, but anyway, there you go. So there's the wear in the links, which is really horrific. So yeah, good call. That can go in the bin, we'll get rid of that. Okay, so the next step is to remove the rear wheel from the bike so we can replace the rear sprocket. Once the rear sprocket's on, we can also pop the new front sprocket on, thread the chain through, get the wheel all the way forward on its adjusters, and then we can work out how long the chain needs to be. Sometimes you've got to cut these chains. You can buy them in different number of links for the chains. You also need the correct size chain for your bike, and I know that this one is a 520 chain. Okay, so we'll use the same cracking bar again to release the rear. It shouldn't be very tight because, well, basically I left it loose knowing that I was doing this job, so. That's the rear seat retaining nut, the castle nut removed. And just be careful you get all the washers off as well. We've got on there, we've got the main washer, followed by this little thingy, which is probably an original washer that held a plastic cap, but that's long gone. And of course the castle nut. Very important to go back on in the correct order. And now we should be able to remove that centre pin. There we go, look. So the pin's out. That should be rust free and greased. If it's not, that's your job to do it. And now we can remove the rear wheel. Now on each side of the rear wheel we have spacers. That's the one for the right hand side of the wheel, so we'll pop that down on the right hand side of the bench, and that's the one for the left hand side. Notice at this point in time I've not changed any of the chain adjustment. We'll do that a bit later on. So just get this up and out of the way. Okay, so the next job now is we've got retaining tabs again on these four retaining nuts for the rear sprocket. So I'm going to get a pound through screwdriver or maybe a punch and just tap those down flat, and then I can undo those four nuts. Okay, so I'm using a small flat-ended punch. You can see that okay? And I'm just going to pop these tabs back down flat. So get in there. He says, there we go, it's one. Now, you don't have to buy new ones of these every time. There are a couple of tabs on each one. One more to go. Perfect. So we can just crack these off now. Again, keep the sprocket carrier in the wheel, it holds it all tight for you. And then we can just crack those off. Be careful you don't wrap your knuckles on the teeth of the sprocket. Not ideal. Again, you can use a rattle gun if you want, but I tend to stay away from that because it tends to munch up the threads now and again. Okay. Cool, easy. Okay, these tabs are always in pairs. And if you need to replace them, you need to go to the bike manufacturer's franchise dealer for those. So in this case, a Yamaha dealer, and he'll happily sell you some more of those. Chances are they'll be in Japan, so you'll have to wait a couple of weeks for them, which is often the reason why people just put the old ones back on again. Okay, so now sprocket out. Hopefully, there we go. Been in there a long, long time by the looks of it.